for decades. Julia Grosso from Vancouver to win it for Canada! Canada came! Canada conquered! Canada gold at Tokyo 2020!
You're listening to the Northern Football Podcast, your home for everything Canadian soccer, with Brendan Dunlop, Alex Gange-Ruzic, and here's your host, Ben Steiner.
Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast, episode 193. Kicking, screaming, shouting. It wasn't the U.S. presidential debate, but there was a lot of kicking, screaming, and shouting in what was definitely 90 minutes of soccer between Canada and Mexico. 0-0. I don't know really what you can take from that. We've got a few questions here already. Thanks, guys, for contributing questions right at the final kick as we dive into this very quickly. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gange-Ruzic. Brendan just putting his son to sleep as well, who is up late as he gets readjusted to Eastern time. But Alex, just your early thoughts on that one, because it was definitely not the most advanced game of football.
Yeah, I hope Rock didn't watch the game, because if he did, I don't think we'll be seeing Brendan tonight, because I don't think I'll be able to sleep. It's just after how like violent, physical, like bloody. Like on one hand, I'm like, that was a really good Nations League semifinal. The problem is it was a friendly in Arlington, Texas in September. It was just a very strange match. Like, it was just, I mean, I guess one thing you can commend Mexico for is we sat here a couple of days ago talking about the U.S. and how it looked like they really just didn't care out there. Well, Mexico looked like they cared, and perhaps a little too much, in the sense that it was just so many fouls, so cynical, so many yellow cards. But for Canada, it's the ultimate compliment, right? That a team like Mexico, that 5-6 years ago, 10 years ago, that's Canada trying to desperately hang on against Mexico, and it kind of felt like a bit of a role reversal. It felt like Mexico was doing anything to slow the game down, to chop it up, to get Canada off their game. That's where Canada's come. U.S. didn't offer them that respect. They got punished for it. Mexico gave them that respect, and we got a very cagey 0-0 game that might traumatize a few babies.
And, you see that risen standard from Canada as well. Like, throughout that match, it was disappointing because Canada couldn't play the, beautiful, free-flowing, high-press football that we've seen them play over the last little while. But I think in some ways it was a good test, because these are games that they're going to find themselves in. Mexico is fortunately at this level right now. They're at a level that is not attracting fans in a stadium that usually in past years they would have packed out for a friendly match. That's why they play these games in the U.S., because it's so financially lucrative for them to do so. And they just look lackluster. They don't look like a team that can really compete with Canada or the U.S. And U.S., which didn't really care, they certainly didn't look like they cared against New Zealand earlier tonight either. But there's still a better test than this Mexican team. And for Canada to get a physical test like this, it's unfortunate that it sort of has to come in this way, where Canada isn't able to kind of learn anything from this. But being able to get into a game like this against Mexico is decent enough.
Well, I'd say I'd almost disagree and say you can't learn anything, because I still think you can learn a lot. Because I think against the U.S., what we learned is that, okay, when Jesse Marsh ball, as we'll call it, when it's working, it's working. The press, the transition, sitting deep, the U.S. just being so naive and playing through it, great. But the reality is, when teams see that vertical style of play, if they see what Canada's doing on the counter, what are they going to do? They're going to sit a little deeper. They're going to chop the game up. This is the kind of game that Canada's going to have to get used to, especially in CONCACAF, where there's teams that aren't shy. Like, Honduras, no problem at all. They'll play this kind of game for you. There's some other examples of it. So I think you can learn a lot for Canada, and I think it's worth noting that offensively, it was a bit disappointing, I'd say, a bit lackluster. For what it's worth, they got into good areas, but their final product was lacking that final pass, that final touch, and that has been a problem in the past, right? Breaking down low blocks. It's just under Jesse Marsh, especially at Copa America. Most teams were like, Canada, fine, let them sit back, let them hit us on the counter. And this has kind of been one of the first games where a team like Mexico is like, no, we don't want you to hurt us on the counter. I think that's going to be a lesson for Canada to learn, because they did struggle to break Mexico down on that regard. But on the flip side, I think what's good is until the last 5 to 10 minutes of the game, and even then, like, Canada was never really under threat either. Like, Mexico did have that late flurry. Canada had made a bunch of changes. Mexico had made a bunch of changes. The game finally opened up. If you're Canada, that is a good point of encouragement, that at least they weren't getting much, but Mexico wasn't getting much either.
I mean, there were opportunities for Canada, like Kyle Larin, one of his better games recently. Of course, he was playing as a single striker tonight to start off as well, and I thought he looked a little bit more comfortable and a little better, even though he was a little bit isolated. But I think we saw what he can be when he's not necessarily tethered to Jonathan David, even though they both played well in a partnership against the U.S. But, he rises to that header. It is perfectly placed. He did everything right. It was just a good stop from the Mexican goalkeeper. Then Liam Millar finds his way through once. I thought that we'd get a Jonathan David chance at some point. Tenny Oluwase, I thought would probably get through at least once as well. Jason Russell-Rowe, I would have liked to see him 5-10 minutes earlier, just considering the impact he's been able to make in similarly chippy games in Leagues Cup and the Champions League. But a question from Dublet, it kind of reminds him of the game against Trinidad in February, where the artificial turf made it tough to control a bouncy ball, find rhythm, and set up plays. It just makes for a very different game for the players, and overall a frustrating one for fans too, because this is still a program that needs to play exciting football for fans to get on the bandwagon ahead of 2026. Alistair Johnston told us that they want to play exciting football. They want to excite fans. They want to get fans watching these games. And unfortunately, this was, an entertaining, chippy game from a, chippiness perspective. And, sometimes you can find those bloodbath type games entertaining, especially if you already know the qualities of a team. But who knows how many people were tuning into the CanMNT for the first time tonight. But if they were, I don't necessarily know if you're coming back, because it was ugly.
Yeah, I mean, valid, right? Like, it was ugly. So, I certainly you could share that sentiment from Canada's perspective. But also, I think that's just the reality of CONCACAF, that sometimes it is hard to play free-flowing, because there will be teams that will do everything in their power to not do that. I think that's also something that's just naturally going to turn a lot of people off, and why some, even if Canada's playing big games, might be more reluctant to turn on the telly during a CONCACAF game versus a World Cup game, where at least, there aren't many games like that. For every Argentina-Netherlands where they try to kill each other, for the most part, the games are a little more calma. They're a little less chippy to that extent. So no, it's a valid point in terms of that. But for Canada, I think this just shows like what you have to do is got to play quicker. I think that was one thing that stood out is, yes, it's great you're winning a lot of fouls, but if you are taking that extra touch, 2 touches, you'll win a lot of fouls. That's what Mexico wants, especially when the referee, and I think that's something to keep note as well, that for Canada, well, I know we have some questions about the referee, and what kind of went down in that regard. If you're Canada and you see that yellow cards aren't going to be given, then there's no point to be looking for fouls. Of course, you're going to get fouled, but it's something where, okay, if yellows are being given, if there's clearly going to be an edge to be gained, it was clear, like Cesar Huerta, how many fouls did he have? And he was on a yellow at one point, and he made 3 or 4 fouls after. There wasn't going to be much discipline in this game. I think if you're Canada as well, again, it's about, all right, just accept it, play a little quicker, try to break Mexico's line. And I think for Canada as well, they did kind of play into Mexico's hand a bit in that regard.
And, we did get a fair number of questions about the referee as well. But from a refereeing perspective, do you think refs should protect the players a little bit more in a friendly like this and make sure that you're not getting any injuries, even if it does start to get out of hand? Because in my books, you have to ref a game like this differently than you would a Nations League semifinal, a World Cup qualifier, a World Cup game in that respect, because there's not that desire to get injured really from anybody, even if the players are going all out. And they're competitive athletes. They're going to go 100%, basically every time. Nobody wants to lose, even if it is a friendly. But I think that falls on the refs and, the organizers to, temper that a little bit and make sure that nobody comes out worse for wear out of a game like this, because you don't want to see injuries in a game like this. You want to see 2 good tests. And I think we saw that tonight, but at times it kind of boiled over.
Yeah, 1,000%, right? Because I think what really surprised me is just the reluctance to use yellows. Fine, no problem. It was great to see Canada and Mexico chippy, right? Kind of after what we mentioned about Canada-US, we kind of hoped secretly Canada-US would be some tackles, some, maybe someone looking at Jesse Marsh, who are you? Except this, we got that today, but also the reality is it's a friendly. What I don't get is, I get in group stages, there's yellow card accumulation. Maybe You're a little more hesitant. It's a semifinal. You don't want to affect the game too much by giving a controversial second yellow. I get why that is the case. Although, I won't always fully agree with it, but I get it. in this game, what's the use of not giving a yellow? Like, what are you going to do? Get suspended for yellow card accumulation on a friendly, right? Even red cards. Like, that for me was what was a surprise. And I'm like, all right, Canada and Mexico want to play this way, fine. Give them yellows. And that goes both ways. Like, Canada got, it's something where Canada, to their credit, and this is that kind of new Canada we've seen, is like Canada maybe a few years ago would have lost their heads and they could have lost this game 2 or 3-0. No, they gave back. Like, it was some hard fouls. Eustachio, Sigur came on and was getting thrown right into the mix. You had Choiniere put in a meaty challenge that did get a yellow, and there were some tough challenges, but if you're the referee, it's a friendly. Just like give them yellows and be like, all right, if you want to play that way, well, we might have to play with 10. We might have to play with 9 because it is a friendly.
Yeah, I do think that there should be a hesitancy around red cards, because if you give a red card, it's effectively a lost contest because, you're not playing the game in the same way. There's not really any takeaways for either team. One team can say that they played with 10 men. One team can say that they won, but they were, a man advantage for an extended period of time. But the yellows can be used to manage the game and to protect the players. And I think that that's important in a game like this. And, as you said, there probably should have been less hesitancy in terms of using the yellows. But you mentioned Niko Sigur as well. And the question from Jay on the Spot 12, I don't think we can take much from Niko Sigur's debut, but did he really receive a bit of a CONCACAF baptism tonight? Because he was thrown right in there. He goes in as a bit of a right back / right midfielder coming on for Ali Ahmed.
Yeah, I mean, first, before we address that, I just want to say Jesse Marsch so far, don't trust what he says when it comes to positions, because Alphonso Davies is a winger. Nope. Niko Sigur slotting in as a midfield. Nope. I mean, to be fair, I think this was probably not something Jesse Marsch planned, right? Because Alistair Johnston gets out injured. There's no other real natural right back other than could have put Ahmed back there, but he'd already played heavy minutes. So, just on that note, I thought that was a bit funny. But yeah, what a way to get welcome in, right? Like he comes in. I think he got a meaty challenge where he almost fell right into the ad boards. He ends up giving one back. The good news is, I think in the Croatian league, he's seen a fair share of that. I'm sure in youth sports as well. It's not anything he hasn't seen a bit of physical play, a bit of contact, but it was definitely a bit of a rude awakening to the new guy from the Mexicans. But good. I mean, Niko Sigur is going to have to get used to it, right? So, and again, I think he is pretty used to it given where he plays. And
outside of just this match as a lone match, but in terms of the whole window, another question from Jay on the Spot 12, and as well as a few other listeners, who are the biggest, winners of this window in terms of the Canadian players? Jay on the Spot 12 thinks it's Ali Ahmed and Mathieu Choiniere. I would probably say similarly, more so Choiniere. I think he really developed in that depth role, and you can go back about what Jesse Marsch was talking about coming out of Copa America, what he said to us in the media meet and greet at Cafe Dip in Toronto, or at least Brendan and I, is that they need to develop the depth of this roster so they can compete with these top teams that can go to their second and third choice guys and still compete. That's where they're behind Mexico and the US still, and I think Mathieu Choiniere really established himself as that depth option, even though I don't necessarily see him as a starter moving forward. And I think you can say the same about Ali Ahmed and Richie Lurea in some respects as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'd say Ali Ahmed, he's really made an interesting case. I think genuinely, especially when you think of how Tejan Buchanan was kind of struggling before his injury anyways, that's going to be a very good battle. And, one that I think, again, we outlined it in the last show, why I think that's the case with what Ahmed brings. And for me now, it's consistency, right? Okay, it's not like a flash in the pan against Uruguay. It's all right, go to the U.S. and you're one of the best players on the pitch. In this game, he was getting hacked at all game too. He kept his composure. He's the one who put in that golden cross for Laird, so he easily could have had an assist. He had some dangerous moments. For me, that consistency is impressive because the other teams are clearly realizing this number 20, this Ali Ahmed, get tight on him, kick him, and he's playing through that. That's also impressed me. Ahmed's definitely going to create some tough discussions. But I think the same goes for Choiniere, because I think if you're Jesse Marsch, again, we talked about the flexibility. You now can open up Kone playing higher up the field. I think Choiniere, again, the work rate, it helps so much for that press. So Choiniere definitely improved his stock. I think Lurea's stock was already in a good spot, but it definitely helps as well that he puts in, 2 good shifts. But I think that's honestly across the board. It's what's good is that I don't think anyone's stock really went down, at least compared to where it was. Even Dane Sinclair comes in, has a very good game this game. It was a good reminder. Crepeau's been super solid, but like St. Clair's just right there knocking on the door. Like, it's nice to know that Marsh is also willing to trust St. Clair, because, hey, you never know in this game. Maybe, there'll be something where St. Clair's thrust into a Nations League semifinal, thrust into a Nations League final for whatever reason. It's nice to know that he's been up to the task on the few occasions he's been given. But yeah, other than that, I'd say those are the big winners. But what I will say, what's kind of flew under the radar, I thought some of Canada's big guns put in a good shift. Like Jonathan David was really good across both games. Great to see, because, even on this podcast, there were questions asked of him. Alphonso Davies, I thought, was really, really good defensively in both games. Even this Mexico game, he put in a shift defensively. Like, that's good things too, to see your star players stepping up in these friendlies. Because while for us, the neutral, it's all about the new faces, the new guys we don't see as much. It is nice to see them compete and want to keep their spots even though they're nailed in.
Yeah, I think with Davies in particular, you see him at the end of the game and just his leadership as a captain in terms of rallying the team in the 88th minute after he makes a block in the box on a very good attempt from Mexico, as Mexico were kind of coming on attacking-wise. And you look at Davies, 2-3 years ago, he was a little bit more shy. He wasn't that leader, but he's been entrusted with the armband under Jesse Marsh, and I think we saw sort of what that leadership can be in those final moments against Mexico. So I think that's probably a positive. And then, you look at the Jonathan David and Kyle Aarons of the world as well. David, of course, gets the goal against the U.S. Can't find the back of the net this time, but we saw, solid defensive efforts from them both. Also improved attacking efforts from them both as well, because, Jonathan David, if you listen to the podcast, you've heard my thoughts on Jonathan David and his Lille success translating to the national team. And then Kyle Aaron looked alive, attacking-wise, for lack of a better word.
Get him a goal. Mallorca, all I bet, Kyle Aaron, that's your goal. That's your goal, no pun intended, is to go get a couple goals. Because, that's the thing right now with him. It's so hard to gauge. I just gets him in the net. But hey, it's true. It's good to see him get chances for Canada this camp.
Yeah. And the pitch tonight as well was certainly interesting. Herculez Gomez reported that TUDN reported that the grass field used tonight for Mexico versus Canada is new and cost $450,000, and it was only going to be used for this match. After Copa America, I condemn it for it, but geez, they picked a bad moment. Don't know if we'll make it up in ticket sales. We've talked a little bit about the struggle of ticket sales from the Mexican fans playing their games in the U.S., but what do you think of installing a grass pitch for a single friendly against a CONCACAF opponent? It just seems a little bit of overkill to me, especially considering, you're not playing on the best pitches in Liga MX to start off with. What's wrong with playing on some turf or heck at a soccer-specific stadium if you're only going to sell 25 or 30,000 tickets?
Yeah, $450K is absurd. Could you not get something cheaper quoted at Home Depot? I don't know. But that feels like a bit of a... Because it was terrible, too. I think there's one moment that vividly stands out as there was a cross, and Jonathan David, I think, had just come on, and he stepped back because he was waiting for the ball to bounce, and it just died in front of him, and he was just like, what the heck is this grass? That's the funny thing, too, is $450K for not good, but... I mean, that just kind of no pun intended, it kind of sums up what's going on with the agreement in Mexico and whatever. It's got them playing so many games in the U.S. It just feels like they're trying to milk that golden goose, but some of the decisions just continue to lack foresight. And now I think they're going to really look at this window where, you put Mexico in the Rose Bowl, you put Mexico in AT&T, a year ago, 2 years ago, you're going to get a good 60, 70K at the Rose Bowl. You're going to get a good 50K in Texas, and you get a combined 50K across both. It shows what's going on with Mexico is really reaching the consumer base, and that also there's kind of a limit of price gouging them, especially when it's a friendlies versus a Nations League final. You add in this grass, you add in just everything about it, not playing games in Mexico. There's just so many questions to be asked. But at least the good news for Canada, they got 2 tests out of it. But man, you can't help but wonder if this game was played in Canada, what it could have been like for both teams. I'm
also curious to see what a crowd would be like at this point in Mexico. Because, our fans are going to come out and support the national team regardless of their current state. There are enough Mexicans that have come out regularly in the States to support this team, and they weren't out this window, which was certainly interesting. But on that business side as well, from Michael Maz, do you think that the recent news of the players and the CSA reaching a tentative CBA had some effect on the performances in these last 2 games? And on a related note, just how huge is it that some of the resolutions to the CBA and this whole fiasco are finally coming to an end? Of course, it's contingent on CSB and the CSA being able to work out a deal. Then this CBA can happen. But it is positive to see that they both, the men's national team, the women's national team, and the CSA have at least come to a tentative agreement here. It is some progress under Kevin Blue.
Yeah, it's huge, right? Because it's finally all the key stakeholders seeing eye to eye in agreement of, there is, of course, Kevin Blue in the Canada soccer perspective. There's both women's and men's national teams. That's key. And then hopefully, you'd imagine based on the fact they put out this statement that there is, that Jesse Marsh as well had spoken before Blue put out the statement saying that there were positive steps. I think there was an article as well this morning in Canadian Press outlining as well that, like, for CSB perspective, like, it's super close. They've, been all working together in this front. Like, it's encouraging. And I think it goes back to one guy, especially reading the statements from the players, Kevin Blue. I thought it was really interesting to hear what the women's national team had to say about just Blue's, how his clarity that he's brought, the knowledge, just how straightforward he's been in negotiations, how he's been, like, very transparent, because it feels like a lot of the negotiations were anything but. It was a bit of broken telephone, a bit of just figures flying through the media, going through this. No, with Blue, it's been no nonsense, and it's almost been good because there hasn't been much reported externally, because it's been straight up sitting down, getting the job done, right? It's no broken telephone, nothing crazy. And I think that they were able to come now publicly with where they're at. You feel encouraged they're going to get this job over the line, and you're excited because both the men's and women's seem to be quite pleased with what they'll be able to do in the framework to improve, right? Because it sounds like they did take some, they accepted some concessions. Kevin Blue, obviously, as much as he'd like to promise them the moon, I'm still not in a position where he can promise them everything, but it sounds like he found a key. He wasn't undercutting them, right? He wasn't cheating them out of anything. And that was certainly what the players felt like was happening before. So, when you hear that, that's pretty good win on all fronts, right?
Yeah, it screams healthy organization, which Canada Soccer has not screamed over the last 10, 15, 28 years.
It's been a while.
It's been a while since you can say that the organization has, been solid, been able to control the message themselves. And I think that's a big thing as well. Like, as you said, they sat down, they got a deal tentatively done. There's been, conversations to get this work done. It's not been broken telephone in the media like we've seen over the past several years. This was communication from all sides, and then they communicated publicly what's going on and what needs to happen. And I think that is just a very good sign for soccer in this country and Canada Soccer as well. But from Borjan's pants, we'll get back into the players. Why is there no Ahmed to Europe chatter? With everyone healthy, where does he fit? Is an Ali versus Tejan a debate at this point? The thing is, he's not bringing these same performances with the Whitecaps. If he does, I think we can start having that conversation about him potentially moving on to a higher club, but there has to be some more consistency in Major League Soccer with the Whitecaps. He has flashes for sure. He does influence the game for the Whitecaps, but I think there's also an element of the Whitecaps that still doesn't know completely what they are, even though they are finding some success. They add a Stuart Armstrong. They're so reliant on Brian White and Ryan Gauld a lot of the time. Gauld seems to shift all over the pitch, that Ahmed doesn't necessarily have that defined role all the time in the Whitecaps. Yes, he's versatile, but if, as we've seen with Alphonso Davies on the national team and at Bayern, if you have a defined role, you can thrive in that role. And so if Ali Ahmed can get a defined role at the Whitecaps and he can continuously thrive in that, then we can start talking about maybe, this offseason. There's still time this season for him to find that. Maybe this offseason we can start talking about him potentially moving to a higher club or to Europe.
Well, I'm going to agree with you wholeheartedly, and then I'm also going to disagree in that regard. I think what I'd agree is, yes, it comes down to club. I think the same discussions have been had with Jacob Schaffelberg, right? Like, man, it feels like every time he puts on that Canadian shirt, it's just electric. He scores against the U.S. multiple times. He scores against Venezuela. It's great to see, right? And also, by the way, shout out to Schaffelberg, who we didn't see in this Mexico game. Maybe he would have won this Mexico game, but of course, he and his wife are welcoming a child at this or soon, and he had to go back to Nashville. So, just shout out to Jacob Schaffelberg for that. It's very exciting news.
Another dual nat.
Yeah, another dual nat coming down the pipeline. Although sounds like he's got his eyes on potentially. if it's a daughter, getting her to the Halifax Tide, so we'll keep an eye on that. But no, just on a serious note, it was great to see that. But it's like the same discussions. Like, so he's been electric for Canada, but this year for Nashville, partly out of his control because Nashville just hasn't been very good. They had the coaching change. They've just not been the same team. But then also on his regard, he hasn't been able to be as regular, right? He's been playing 60, 65 in games. He hasn't had that end product with Nashville. The reality is, especially in these games, national team performances will draw clubs to player, but also, the club performances might be the difference of offering, because also we don't know, right, of offers. Like maybe they're offering, but what, Nashville will be in there, right? Like, no, you gotta step up the valuation. They're going to do that, etc. And I think for Ali Ahmed, what it is, he's been excellent for the Whitecaps, what I'd say, in just in terms of performances. But what's really like, he could be borderline elite right now in MLS if it was the end product. And that's where the tough thing for Ali Ahmed and the Whitecaps has been this year. Like, there's been so many times I'll leave BC Place. Like, man, he was probably one of the best, if not the best player on the field. But then there's no goals, no assists. And, okay, the game's not all, be all, end all goals and assists. But when you're an attacking player, and especially in his case, he's getting the shots, he's getting the key passes, he's getting the chances, then you're like, okay, maybe you want a bit of end product. So I think that's going to be the big thing. And even for Canada, right? Like two great performances. He didn't get that goal contribution, right? Like he didn't get a goal and assist this window. Not to say, again, doesn't define his performances, but I think that's what teams are looking at that next step. And I think Ali Ahmed's close to that next step because he does everything right. He's getting in the positions, he's taking over games. He needs those goals and assists for teams to be like, okay, he can consistently deliver that final product that teams are looking for from attack players. So that's just really what's next for him with the Whitecaps and with Canada to an extent. So that's probably what I'd say for Europe, because right, with defenders is different. Bombito, Nice isn't caring on that regard. They saw good performances, boom. But it's like the example I point to is Tajon Buchanan. He had 2 to 3 really good seasons with New England. That Bruges $5 million move happened when he had like a 5+ goal, 5+ assist campaign. That's what the next step is for Ahmed, and I'd push it for Schaffelberg as well.
I think the thing that's concerning as well in that respect is that it's not like Ali Ahmed is playing with inept players. Like, he's playing with some of the top attacking contributors in MLS, a new player in Stuart Armstrong that he's going to go into as well. And then, of course, with the national team, he's playing with, Jonathan David, who delivers with club and has, recently delivered with country. So it's not that he's playing with players that aren't able. So even if he's not getting the goals, there shouldn't necessarily be much of an excuse for not being able to get goal contributions, assists, or MLS secondary hockey assists. Like, it's not translating over into those counting stats, and that is, for better or for worse, what catches the eye of big clubs when it comes to players from MLS, where there's still some hesitancy about bringing a player from Major League Soccer.
Yeah, well, part of it's luck, right? Like like Kyle Larin. Kyle Larin heads it home today. Ali Ahmed's having a different Canada win. Like it's also luck, but that's also why I say it's that next step. Because sometimes for players, it's almost like a ceiling you need to break through, right? And like that's for Ahmed, his next step. Like we know he can dominate games. We know he can go out against the U.S. and be one of the best players in the field. We know he can go out against Uruguay. He can go out against anyone for the Whitecaps, be one of the best players in the field. Great. All right. Turn that into that final product. And I just say it's a switch. You see it sometimes. Like I remember when Buchanan hit that switch for New England, like 1 week it's like, man, he's putting in these great performances, and the next week he was scoring goals in consecutive games, and it just felt like everything was clicking for him. That's sometimes all it is for attackers. So hopefully, what I'd say from the Whitecaps perspective, hopefully he gets that chance to find that final product, because of course so much goes through Ryan Gauld and Brian White, and I imagine a decent amount will now go through Stuart Armstrong. A lot goes through Ahmed, but a lot of it can be the pass leading to the pass, or the dribble leading to the pass. Hopefully Ahmed has a chance to be influential in that final third, because I think for him it's there, right? Because I think I'd be more worried if he wasn't getting in those positions. He's getting there. Just got to get that final product.
And a few other players to look at as well. From Ruud Schroed, is Millar running out of chances, and does Osorio have the legs for this system? I think we saw a very positive performance from Osorio tonight. There were a few times that he linked up on the right side with Richie Larea, and it just worked. Like, Canada was getting chances from that right side, at least crosses in that would then get headed away by the Mexican defenders, or Richie Larea wouldn't be able to get to a ball. But like, there were chances coming through Osorio on that side, and I think that's a positive. We also saw, Matthew Choiniere get involved there as well, and maybe in a more positive respect. And then in terms of Liam Millar, I thought he was fantastic on the left side. I know a lot of Twitter discourse and on Discord is saying otherwise, but I still think he can offer something very good down that left side. I like the partnership with Davies being able to overlap. I do like Jacob Schaffelberg in that role a little bit more, but Liam Millar certainly offers something there, and I thought he did have a good game, even though there seems to be a discourse that he played poorly tonight.
Yeah, I mean, to start with the Osorio, you get what you get, and it was good. And I think the reality is you're not going to get that for 90, and I don't think anyone is going to counter that. I think, but it's good to know that Osorio has shown over this summer that there's still a role there, right? That if you need him to start, he can start. If you need him to come off the bench, he can come off the bench. If you need him to play 10, he can play 10. If you need him to play 6, he can be used as an emergency 6. All that's positive. It's midfield depth, and I think now it's going to be nice for Jesse Marsch once he has all his options of Eustáquio, Sigur, Osorio, Choiniere, Kone. Flexibility, right? You, depending on the game, you can go Eustáquio, Kone, Osorio. You can go, Eustáquio, Osorio, Choiniere. Like, you can just mix it up, and I think that's why for Osorio, I think it was just Osorio. As for Millar, it's a bit of a tougher one because I don't think he was poor tonight. I think he was pretty solid, but what I will say is that there were some moments where for him, it wasn't even final product, it was the moments preceding the final product, right? It was like that when he'd take someone on, or that decision. And I think the one moment that kind of summed up his game was a bit unlucky. He gets that like half breakaway. He's there. You got to at least get a shot off, right? And he just kind of swung it there. And that's why it's so tough to reckon with Millar right now for Canada, is that like it's funny because a lot of the players we've had discussions of, like a Schaffelberg, right now Schaffelberg's been like mint for club or for country, and then it's like, all right, if you can replicate that for club, Europe's going to come calling very quickly. But then for Millar, he's doing it at club, but then for whatever reason at country, like at club, he gets those assists, he gets those goals, he gets those final product. And I don't know if it's one of those where it's just sometimes it can be tough to wear that Canada jersey. Maybe there's just knowing that like Schaffelberg's doing so well, then so that he's putting pressure on himself. But I just felt like something was a bit off in that final play. And for Millar, I think there's still a very serviceable player in there no matter what, because he works hard. He's going to help you defend. He's going to take guys on. But I do see in a game like this where you maybe would have liked a little bit more out of a final product, because I think that's where Schaffelberg was missed, right? Because Schaffelberg brought that end product in that U.S. game and helped them win. And unfortunately, Canada was kind of lacking that end product all around. And Millar was just one of those players that maybe wasn't necessarily advancing the cause in that regard, so to speak.
And from Michael Maz, which of the new call-ups for this window do you think deserves another look in the next one? Of course, Canada has that match against Panama, and then potentially something more. You suggested a friendly against CF Montreal, and Jesse Marsch was asked about, a second friendly. He didn't shoot down some sort of different type of idea. Did say that Panama was going to be the only actual different national team opponent, but could there be something against CF Montreal? There might be some legs to that. In terms of next call-ups, I think you have to see whether Ike Ugbo is interested in coming back into the national team picture after, of course, taking off this window as well as the Copa America. I think Niko Sigur, you want another look at, give him more minutes, give him a start, play him in a role that he's going to thrive in and see what you really have in Niko Sigur. And I was a little bit disappointed that we didn't necessarily see that this time. Steven Afrifa, solid. I think you know what you're going to get from him. We spoke about it when he was called up, that he was going to be a player that brings, a lot of well-rounded aspects. He didn't necessarily excite me this window, but there was very few players that necessarily did, especially against Mexico, because it was such a physical game. Sure, you can throw him another call-up, but I don't know if that's going to make such an impact. But I guess those are the only two true new call-ups in this roster. And then, Jonathan Sirois, okay, call him up, whatever. It's a game close. I wouldn't imagine you're bringing a keeper from overseas and Tom McGill, especially as he's in season as well. But I guess what do you think about potentially some of these new call-ups coming back into the picture for the next window?
Yeah, I'd say Sigur's probably the one where you're thinking like he's the lock to bring in, just because there's obviously like a long-term prospects that are being considered there. Everyone else, I think this is a good opportunity for them to reflect on 2 games, a camp, and just build. That's kind of what I say. Like, for example, Nathan Saliba, it's kind of been a bit of a weird summer for him at Montreal. Use this opportunity that you got a chance to play for Canada. You got called up late because of an injury. All right, well, go to Montreal, kind of use this as an uptick, go put in some top performance. Then he can be back 100%. And I think that's kind of ditto with an Afrifa. Like, you deserve this call. Some wingers are out injured right now. We'll go out and go get some more goals for Kansas. And then I'm no problem calling him back. And that's how I kind of feel for a lot of them. It's just like they're in positions where this camp was kind of a good experience for them to get embedded in, to be around the group, for Jesse Marsch to show, like, look, we're looking at you. And now go and prove it. And I think the good news is, too, there's a lot of guys who we haven't seen who are doing similar things, right? Like, of course, we've seen a lot of the names thrown out, like a Promise David. If he goes and gets some regular minutes, USG gets a couple goals, similar vibes with him. You're going to consider him, and I think that's what it goes across the board of just like, if you're on those fringes, just focus on being good at the club level, and your opportunity will come.
And joining us as well, just as we get through some of the Twitter questions, Brendan able to join us. Welcome back to Northern Football, Brendan. Did Rock get to sleep?
Oh, boys. Yeah, I don't know how you set it up for the listeners, but I feel like I just played Mexico. I feel like I had the life kicked out of me. But such is life with a toddler, and in the end, it's not the worst. So, did I miss much, boys? We're already into the breakdown of who needs to be called back and who needs to be sent back home. So I feel like I might have missed the bulk of it.
Definitely missed the bulk of it, but there wasn't much to learn from that game, I don't think. I opened the show by saying that it was feisty, it was a little bit dramatic. There probably should have been more yellow cards, and we're not talking about the U.S. presidential debate, which was also just as unhinged. But I mean, just what do you think of that match? Because I don't think you can learn much from a match like that.
No, you definitely can't. And that's, I think, the frustrating part, because we wanted to see how they really measured up, right? And I mean, to an extent, that's how I felt about the conditions with Azteca, because we're not going to get a tactical and technical game to really see where Canada measured up at the time. Now, they got the win, and in the end, it wasn't actually a horrendous game, but it wasn't a game on a playable surface, and it wasn't a game where they could both play to their level, right? And oddly, that's what this was. This wasn't a friendly. Chris and Jack made a great comment. I think it was in the halftime show that in a lot of ways that felt like a World Cup quarterfinal, where it was super cagey. It was like very tight. Neither team wanted to give it away. And I think we can all list a bunch of teams and games where it's kind of felt like that. The positive for Canada is it's never been Canada on the front foot doing that. And much like we saw at the Copa America, and this is where I was kind of surprised, was very quickly Mexico descended into the Peru-Chile game plan. And I didn't think that they were going to do that. I really didn't. I thought it might play out to that way, or there would be stretches of that, but I didn't think it would be that way out the gate. And the second half was a little better. I think it wasn't as nasty, but they were both just fatigued. And the second half, I think we all felt like we were in a Southwest Airlines commercial. Like we just wanted to get away.
We'll say, Brendan, though, can we just say what your point reflects how far Canada's come? Because Azteca, Canada made Mexico uncomfortable. They brought them to uncomfortable situations. Daniil Henry dropped the boom on Lozano. Canada was really leaning into that because that was what they felt was their advantage to beat Mexico. 3 years later, the tables have kind of turned. It's Mexico who are, kind of laying the boom, finishing the check, so to speak. They're the ones being chippy. They're the ones slowing it down. Does kind of show how the tables have turned in that regard for Canada.
Yeah, and it's a super statement, for a huge statement for the program and for Jesse Marsch in this short period that, we really did think that there might be not a dip after Copa America, but I mean, it's impossible to match that tournament high. And I mean, that 7-game surge that they had, what a baptism by fire, yes, but also what an incredible tone to set for your tenure in this build. And, October might be different if they're playing some club team, if it's the Halifax Wanderers that follow up with the date against Panama at BMO Field, that there will be a natural kind of dip in the progression, but not in the excitement, not in the anticipation. And that's not just from us. That's from everyone involved in the program. Like, they'll be itching to get back into camp again. They'll be itching. There's a November window, right?
Yeah, well, that's the Nations League quarterfinals, so they'll have some competitive games to play by November.
Which will be huge. But we don't have dates and venues. Is that's what we were debating? Whether they could be where they could be here? Yeah.
Although Alex did have an idea that they would play CF Montreal in Montreal, and it seems like Jesse Marsh didn't completely shut that idea down.
Well, yeah, he said they're going to have some sort of framework similar to what Mexico's doing, by the way. I think it was mentioned in the broadcast Mexico's playing Valencia, which is kind of sick, but then Jesse Marsh says, okay, we'll do something like that with partners. So, I mean, we can kind of assume he's the MLS head coach. Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal is paying his salary. I think there's probably a solution to be worked out where we put 2 and 2 together and Canada's playing those clubs, or let's just throw this idea out here.
Canadian MLS All-Stars?
Oh, thank you. I was going to say that.
Did you say Canadian MLS All-Stars?
I like that, but also when you're talking about the time in the MLS schedule and where teams are in the standings, well, CF Montreal might actually have that game because they might not be playing for much at that point.
Yeah, they wouldn't be. It's a great shout, Montreal. I had suggested on CanadianSoccerDaily.com that it would be a CPL tie, and that it might be a CPL, like best 11 CPL All-Star team.
We talked about that before. I think you mentioned that before.
Because it'd be right around like end of CPL season, almost start of playoffs. Like it could actually not be an outrageous shout.
And if you're the CPL, as much as it might be disruptive to the season, like I can't see Bobby Smirniotis loving that idea. In fact, he'd be the first one to come out and say you couldn't get CF Montreal; they're playing for nothing. Right? But it would be pretty cool and like a very rare opportunity, and I think for Marsh and for the players in that squad, look, we're not going to see the A-list guys, but and we're not going to see Choiniere. I guess Choiniere is a bad example. He's gone now. I was going to say Saliba play one half for CF Montreal and one half for Canada if it was CF Montreal.
The old Pele vibes with that.
To see, yeah, it'd be just in general, right? It'd be really cool to see that. How about Jonathan Sirois? If it's CF Montreal, Jonathan Sirois has to play half for Canada and half for CF Montreal.
Or play for CF Montreal, but in a Canada kit.
Complicated.
It gets a little bit confusing, I guess.
Well, just, it's like as long as like whoever the other goalie is wearing the yellow Canada goalie kicks, there's a few, and then Sirois is wearing the black one, I think they can get away with it.
Well, this is a great question because I don't know how much you guys do online shopping, but my son is obsessed with the phone when going to sleep, and the way he just wants to see photos, and the way to get him to like be disinterested in the phone is for me to just go shopping. I can't just like read Canadian Soccer Daily because it's too bright. So I just start scrolling. So I was on some retailer, and I was looking at these kits that they're pumping out. So Umbro's pumping out this like retro goalkeeper kit series. So there's no clubs or anything, but like you can't look at this shirt and not picture a player. And like for me, obviously, like Craig Forrest comes up 3 or 4 times. There's like a Jorge Campo. There's quite a few from kind of that era, 90s, maybe early 2000s. When you think Canada keeper jersey, like when you say yellow, I only think of Craig and Max. I don't even think of Milan in yellow.
I was thinking of Crepeau in yellow. Like for me, it's the sleeves. Yeah. I think of Crepeau in yellow.
For me, it's Aaron McLeod at the 2012 London Olympic qualifying in Vancouver. Aaron McLeod would wear the yellow kit, and I'd go to PE class the next day when I was in, grade 5, and I would refer to my friends. This was before I got like fully into soccer. There was the yellow keeper and the blue keeper, and Karina LeBlanc was the blue keeper because that was the shirt that she wore. And so it was the yellow keeper and the blue keeper. So a yellow Canada kit, it has to be Aaron McLeod for me.
Interesting. Now that you think about it, it actually it tracks. Because for me, McLeod was the purple. I always picture McLeod in purple.
That's
Labe for me is green, especially after the Olympics.
Yeah, Labe's green.
Borjan, he was kind of like some of his best games kind of came in that purple, like right when it was Nike and they had that purple deal going on. And
did he have some black games? Black.
And black was another one. Crepeau yellow. St. Clair, poor guy, I think he's been given gray once or twice, and that's kind of stuck on him. Like, it actually makes sense when you think of a goalie that they have like a distinct color, and it's a bit like jarring whenever there's like some kit switch change and they don't have their preferred color and they're in like something new, and you're like, like, you okay? Like, you don't look quite like you.
Those Mexico kits that they wore Tuesday night in Arlington, those didn't look like real away strips. Those looked like some type of goalkeeper kit.
No, but they were class, though. They looked nice.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Maybe because I still think like...
They've got some like indigenous design, it looks like.
Yeah, the one that they had, was it at it wasn't the World Cup. Was it Copa, the last cycle where it was like maroon and like clay or a gray color? I can't remember which one that was, but that's one of the best ones of all time. Mexico like historically has some phenomenal kits, but the last one that's like if it's an indigenous design, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it looks like paisley type shapes. It looks kind of like a raindrop-y shape that I thought was goalkeeper kitted, and then this one that they wore on Tuesday I thought was the same.
If you could bring back one Canada kit from years past, what would it be? I would say it has to be the blue one that I think it was an Umbra one. They played in it once for the Canada Soccer 100-year anniversary.
2012, I want to say, or something like that.
I've been looking for one for years, and I can't come across one.
I'm almost positive it was 2012. This would be a fantastic game. If you pull up the starting 11 while I ramble here, Alex, so you pull up the starting 11, you will be amazed at some of the players in that squad. Because
let me just guess, like the Adam Straiths, Toe St. Ricketts of the world?
I think Toss
would have been.
He
I don't know
played
if
in
Adam
that
Straith
game.
would have been. But like David Edgar was in the starting 11. I know this because David Edgar's face is in the back of a photo with D-Row, who's leading the line. I went through this photo selection in picking photos for the book.
I think I found
there was so many good ones in blue. I'm like, they never wore this kit again. How many of these pictures can we put in this book?
Because it's June 3rd, 2012. Does that ring a bell? BMO Field?
Yes.
All right. So we got Lars Hirschfeld in goal. You got David Edgar, Andre Hainaut, Ante Jazic, Nick Ledgerwood, Kevin McKenna captain the side, Julian de Guzman, Dwayne Di Rosario, to St. Ricketts, Will Johnson, Olivier Océan, Simeon Jackson, Pedro Pacheco, Ian Hume, Samuel Piet, and Mike Klukowski all came off the bench. And some unused subs were Kenny Stamtopoulos, Dejan Jakovic, did I mention Atiba? Yeah, no, Atiba Hutchinson was an unused sub. Ashton Morgan, Issy Nakajima, Farron were some of the unused substitutes.
The fact that Sam Piet is still within the national team picture, 12 years later? That's pretty impressive.
It's pretty impressive. Who is the Chicago Bears quarterback you said came off the bench? Mike Lachowski?
Mike Klikowski.
I don't even know who that is.
Mike Wazowski?
It says Klikowski. Actually, that name rings a bell. I think there's a kid with that last name who's been playing for the Canada's youth national teams lately, so maybe his heritage might live on.
Wow.
I'll pull up one last topic before we shut down this NFP After Dark. It's about 12:04 for Brendan and I, and 9:04 for Alex. But if the CPL and MLS playoffs started today, we'd have the Whitecaps taking on RSL in a best of three, and then TFC would take on DC United in a single game knockout. If you guys were to pick your winner today for those two series, what would they be? Just, it's our only episode of the week. We got to give a shout to the domestic leagues.
Yeah, for sure. Alex, does that face suggest that you are torn because you feel as though we might be talking about a 0 for 2?
Oh, no, I'm just saying that face is to go first because I heard Whitecaps RSL, and I'm trying to think, what the heck was the other one I say that Ben said?
TFC versus DC.
Ooh.
I am nervous for the Whitecaps because I do actually think that Dallas game where, yes, they dominated and they took a point, and in the grand scheme of things, like, I don't think it's going to be a nail in the coffin of their season, but I do think it exemplifies how limited that they really are, that it requires Ryan Gauld and Brian White and Fafa Picault being exceptional for them to get results. And if you think about the games where they've won by multiple goals, most of those games the other team has been quite shit. So that doesn't happen in the playoffs. And that's why in this best of three, where you still would, I'm assuming that they would have the home pitch advantage. They should be. I worry that they might collapse like they tend to do when they get into the playoffs looking good and then just fall flat no matter what the playoff format is.
So welcome to MLS, where teams don't look as good without their DPs. No, just kidding.
You're right. That does sound like a take for someone that just started watching MLS in 2024. Yes,
No, no, I'd say it's like there's definitely some basis to it of the Whitecaps like relying a lot on Ryan Gauld. So I get you it there, but it was just kind of funny the way you laid it out of like, those DPs, you take them out of the team and then all of a sudden they don't look as good. Who would have thought?
It doesn't matter for Inter Miami. They take away their DPs.
They take away the
7
DPs? 9 DPs?
Great point. I mean, Chicago had the highest paid guy in the league, and they were crap the whole time with Xherdan Shaqiri. So it's not exclusive. Nashville still win games when Hani Mukhtar isn't elite, is my point. Right?
What was it? He had like 60% of their goals, though, like contributions over the last 4 years. So, like, there weren't many games. Like, his shit was still goal and an assist.
Yeah, you're right. 60% of your contributions.
It was something ridiculous. I think it might actually be like 50. It was 50% for a while. I don't know if it ever hit 60, but like he had that one season where it was like 20 goals, 15 assists, and like Nashville only scored like 45 goals. Like they weren't like an elite offensive powerhouse.
I just happen to be remembering, the one match against CF Montreal where they squeaked through with a 1-0 victory because Dax McCarty or something. Yeah,
hanging up the boots, Dax McCarty. But TFC versus DC, if you had to pick a winner in a one-off match.
Yeah, one-off. Oof. Christian Benteke. I think that, like, you'd think TFC could show up to play for a game like that, but the pressure's on them, man. Like, there's a real, we talk about this in for national teams, and this is this narrative carries England no matter the generation, that the weight of the badge, the weight of the shirt, like the TFC players feel that, man. There's like. And Herdman said that when he came in, like, there's trauma here. And it's true. Like, it exists whether you're a high-paid player like Insigne or Bernardeschi or whether you're a long-standing player and homegrown like Osorio. Like, it is a real thing, a tangible thing. And collectively, it does feel like it's too much for them. So I would be worried in a one-off if I was TFC against DC United, even though on paper they should have their way with DC.
It's a trick question because winner gets Miami, and I don't think whichever team is going to win that is going to win the next round against Miami.
Best of 3 especially.
Best of 3 against Miami, and congrats if you make it up to 7th. Well, you get Cincinnati or Columbus. Like,
jeez, oh my God, what is the point? They should just mail it in.
No, that's why it's so useless. That's why I think of like the fact that Montreal's been so bad this year, and they're still in, like, there's the Gabriel Gervais presser this week, and they're asking them to still make the playoffs. I'm like, in what world do you have a summer like Montreal's had, and you're still within touching distance of playoffs? But yeah, they let in 9 teams. It's just, that's what I was like, because that DC team hasn't been too great either. I just want to throw in for the first answer. I didn't get around for the Whitecaps answer. What I'll say about the RSL one, I don't like that matchup. I think the RSL gets them, but that's what I've noticed about the West this year, and I think what you're going to see manifest. The West is like really weirdly, there's like 1 or 2 top teams, and I think it's LAFC, and depending on the day, I think RSL, for my opinion, is one of them. LA Galaxy can be one of them. Kind of depends on the day, really, right? It's like whichever team wants to be at LAFC level. But from like, even LAFC included, from 1 to 9, all teams match up so weirdly against each other. Like, everyone has their teams that they confidently beat, and every team and teams have the ones they don't. And I think for the Whitecaps, unfortunately, RSL is one of the teams they've struggled against. It's them and LAFC. Whereas if you get those two in a playoff matchup, I don't fancy it. Whereas the Whitecaps, funnily enough, I think they might have a better chance against a Galaxy with the way that the Galaxy are set up to play a little more open. That can allow the Whitecaps to hit in transition. You look at, we've seen it this year. They've matched up pretty well against the Sounders. They've matched up pretty well against those kinds of teams. So I think RSL, purely just based on the way they match up with that RSL team, it's just not good. They're so good defensively. They've got lethal options on the counter. It would be a tough matchup.
And when they get Chicho Arango back, like, it'll be an astoundingly tough one. I'd say that RSL takes that in a best of 3, and I think that DFC does get through a DC match, especially if they can host that game. But as we talked about before, I think it's, winning a match without much hope going on a run, because you're going to get 3 of the best teams to ever grace MLS in the next round, most likely one with Lionel Messi coming back as well. And I don't think Messi's going to play in Toronto either, considering how gentle he's been, and that the fact that they'll probably have clinched the Supporters' Shield at that point as well, the final week of the season.
You think they would have clinched it, but do you not think, even with Messi, that there is an importance to get him competitive game action? Or for him, does that honestly just not matter?
I don't think it necessarily matters.
This guy showed up after his holiday and, came off the bench and put a top corner free kick against Cruz Azul last year, and kind of set the tone for what has been his Inter Miami tenure.
Yeah. I guess you're right. I guess the body management is not the same for somebody like that, and here I am still doubting him. Well, but he's a 38-year-old human being.
And on the CPL as well, we won't run through the whole gambit. Of course, we want to give respect to each of the Canadian teams, but Forge is, of course, leading the league, as they so often do in the CPL, and then we'd have that single knockout game between Cavalry and Vancouver that would make their playoff debut if things stay as is. But who would you have winning the CPL title at this point?
It's good question. I think right now, Forge, it's they've just been so dominant. For what it's worth, the only other time they ever won the regular season, they didn't win the final. So who knows? Maybe they're actually looking at this like, but the reality is you'd back them, especially with this new format. Like, you'd back them in that 1v2 game. If they host, they broke the curse last year of the finals host, right? That was obviously a big plus for them winning at home. Like, it's hard to bet against Forge. But what I'll say, though, is York, they feel built for the playoffs. Like, I think the way how good they've been defensively under Benjamin Moore, if they get their pieces back healthy, and even if they're a number 3 seed, I think they'll be comfortable making a bit of a run. For Cavalry, I've been really bullish on them, but it's just injuries. It feels like every time they get their pieces, like they lost Mile Henry for this season. Tobias Warszewski's been out for a while, and they've really missed him in attack. That's probably the big thing for Cavalry. Just can they keep guys healthy at both ends of the field? So right now, Forge York 905 derby in the final, I could really see it happening.
Yeah, if I had to make a call for who's going to win the CPL at this point, I say York. I just think everything's sort of coming together for York United this year, that they'd pull off an upset in the final, likely against one of their Ontario rivals. I'd love to see what a CPL final can attract at York Line Stadium. The biggest game in the league. Can they sell that place out? Can they potentially add more stands? You and I have gone back and watched several times the York United versus CF Montreal game from the first season. And it's like, wow, that was electric at York Lions Stadium. Could we see that happen with a major game? I'd love to see it tested, even though I think, the stage of a Cavalry, even a Vancouver, a Forge, and Atletico Ottawa, like those are great stages for the final because they have sort of grand stadiums, and the single-sided stadium doesn't necessarily offer the same sort of vibe. But I'd love to see York United make the final, and that's who I'll go for now, is York United taking the CPL playoff title this year.
Yeah, we'll see if the magic, right? It feels like that's what we're curious to see. Last year just ended up being the top 2 teams, no drama, but like Vancouver, for example, what I'll say in terms of talent, they got a lot of talent. And who knows, maybe they just embrace parking the bus and they go on a run. Of course, can't count out Pacific, because them and Vancouver have a very big, very important head-to-head this weekend that could kind of determine which of those 2 teams gets an inside track, and Valor's lurking. But who knows, like all those teams, could any of them make a run? It's pretty unlikely from the 4th versus 5th place match, because you need like 4 wins to get all the way and win it all. But maybe that's why I look at that 3rd place match, even, right? Like an Ottawa with the talent they have. Like they're always going to have the talent to win games, and sometimes the reality is in playoffs, it isn't the team who plays the nicest football. It isn't the team that plays the best. It's which star players decide games. Ottawa can look at Del Campo, Aparicio, Bassett. Like, that guy can go win me a playoff game.
That's all we've got for episode 192 of the Northern Football Podcast. Alex Gangiruzik and Brendan Dunlop joining myself, Ben Steiner, here on Northern Football. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. And, of course, you can watch us on YouTube as well at the 90th Minute as we're part of the Nation Network. I head back to Vancouver on Thursday. Alex and I will be in studio. Brendan is off to Ottawa, and Rock is hopefully off and rocking lullabies to sleep. But that's all we've got for this episode. CanMNT 0, Mexico 0. Bit of a wrestling match in some ways, but we certainly spent a little bit of time breaking that down here.